She came back from the stars and healed every scar. The return of silver rain. The rain that fell on Ashvale that October evening was wrong from the first drop. Cale Thorne noticed it while planing a cedar board in his workshop. The sound against the tin roof was too musical, almost crystalline, like wind chimes made of glass. He set down his tools and stepped outside, holding his calloused palm up to the sky. The droplets were silver. Actual silver, catching the dying light and turning his rough skin metallic where they landed. What the hell? He muttered, watching the liquid bead and roll off without soaking in. In 28 years in these mountains, he'd seen storms that could strip bark from trees and snow that fell in May, but never this. Movement at the tree line caught his eye. Someone was stumbling through the silver rain, barely upright, following the path toward the ancient stone bridge that crossed the ravine. Cale's chest tightened. That bridge had been half collapsed since the landslide 5 years ago. No one used it anymore. No one except him, when the memories got too heavy and he needed to stand where Marin had last stood. He ran. The figure, a woman, he realized as he got closer, was wearing a dress that seemed to be made of the same liquid mercury as the rain itself, flowing and reforming with each laboured step. Her hair was long and dark, plastered to her face, and she was barefoot on the rocky ground. She reached the bridge's edge and swayed. Cale lunged forward, catching her just as her legs gave out. She was surprisingly light, as though her bones were hollow, and she smelled like petrichor and something else, something that reminded him of winter nights when the stars seemed close enough to touch. Her eyes fluttered open. They were grey, but not the grey of storm clouds. The grey of distant nebulae, of things seen through vast distances. "Cale Thorne," she whispered, her voice layered with strange harmonics. "I have been looking for you." Then she went limp in his arms as the silver rain intensified, turning the world around them into liquid light. The language of wounds. Lyra woke slowly, her consciousness reassembling like scattered pages finding their order. She was lying on something soft, a bed, she remembered those, in a room that smelled of sawdust and cedar and old grief. Cale sat in a wooden chair by the window, watching her with cautious, exhausted eyes. He hadn't slept, she could tell. His dark hair was still damp from the rain, and he'd changed into worn flannel and canvas pants that bore the stains of his trade. His hands, resting on his knees, were the hands of someone who built things and broke things in equal measure. Strong, scarred, capable. "You've been out for 3 days, he said quietly. "I almost took you to the doctor in Millbrook, but every time I tried to move you toward the truck, you'd start to, I don't know, flicker. Like a bad light bulb." "I am not meant for vehicles of combustion," Lyra said, sitting up carefully. The room tilted, then steadied. "They disrupt the frequency of my being." Cale's jaw tightened. "Right. Okay. Sure." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Who are you? What are you?" The questions were fair. Lyra pulled the memories forward, sorting through the fragments of what she'd been before she took form. "I am Lyra. I am a wanderer. I travel the thin places between what you call dimensions, seeking worlds where suffering has become so concentrated it begins to crystallize into physical form." She watched his expression shift from skepticism to something harder to name. "And I was sent here for you," she continued softly. "Because your pain has grown so dense it is poisoning the land itself. The silver rain, that was your grief, Cale Thorne. It has nowhere else to go." Cale stood abruptly, turning toward the window. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched into fists. Slowly, he reached up and pulled his shirt over his head. His back was a map of suffering. Long, deep scars crisscrossed the muscle, some surgical clean, others ragged and brutal. They were old but angry, raised and pale against his tanned skin. 5 years ago," he said, voice rough, "there was a landslide. My sister Marin was on the bridge when it happened. I tried to dig her out with my hands, with broken boards, with anything I could find. A support beam fell across my back, pinned me there while she died 20 feet away, calling my name." He turned around, and she saw the jagged scar across his right shoulder. "I could hear her. Couldn't reach her. Couldn't save her." Lyra rose from the bed, unsteady but determined. She crossed the space between them and raised her hand, hovering at inches from his scarred skin. She could feel the pain radiating from the damaged tissue, not just physical, but emotional, spiritual, all twisted together into knots that pulled tighter with each passing year. "I can help," she whispered. "If you let me. I can teach your body a different way to hold what happened." Cale's eyes, dark and wounded, met hers. "What's the catch?" "There is always a cost," Lyra admitted. "But first, you must understand what healing truly means." The healing through memory. Cale agreed on the second morning, when he woke from another nightmare of Marin's voice calling his name and found Lyra sitting cross-legged on his workshop floor, surrounded by the unfinished furniture he couldn't bring himself to complete. "These pieces," she said without looking up, running her hand over a half-carved rocking chair, "they are all for her, aren't they?" He nodded, leaning against the doorframe. "I start them on the bad days. Never finish them. Don't know why." "Because completing them would mean accepting she is gone," Lyra said simply. "The unfinished state is a kind of waiting." Something in Cale's chest cracked open. He crossed the workshop and knelt beside her. "Okay. I'm ready. Whatever you need to do." Lyra turned to face him fully. In the morning light filtering through the dusty windows, she looked more solid, more real, but still ethereal, as though she existed slightly out of phase with the world around them. "Remove your shirt," she said gently, "and lie down." He did, stretching out on the worn floorboards. The wood was cool against his scarred back. Lyra knelt beside him, positioning herself so she could reach the worst of the damage, the long, ragged scars where the beam had torn through muscle and scraped bone. "I need you to remember," she said, placing both hands on his back. Her palms were warm, almost hot, and where they touched, his skin began to glow with a soft, silvery light. "Not the pain, but everything around it. Remember Marin before that day. Remember what you loved." Her fingers began to trace the scars, following their paths with excruciating slowness. Where she touched, the tissue began to soften, to flow like water beneath skin, rearranging itself into patterns that resembled rivers or currents of light. And with the transformation came the memories, flooding back with a clarity that stole his breath. Marin at 6, gap-toothed and laughing, teaching herself to whistle. Marin at 12, furious at him for reading her diary, then forgiving him with a fierce hug when he apologized. Marin at 16, the last morning, braiding her hair at the kitchen table while he made coffee, the sun turning her auburn hair copper-bright. "Don't stop," Cale gasped as tears ran down his temples into his hair. "Please don't stop." Lyra didn't. She traced every scar, transforming each one, and with each transformation, Cale felt the memories settle differently in his body. No longer shards of glass embedded in his flesh, but something gentler. Proof that Marin had existed. Evidence of love, not just loss. When Lyra finally lifted her hands, the scars on his back had become flowing lines of faint luminescence beneath his skin, like veins of silver running through stone. Beautiful. Permanent. But no longer painful. Cale sat up slowly, reaching back to touch the transformed skin. It was smooth, warm, alive with subtle light. "The shoulder next," Lyra said, and something in her voice had changed, grown strained. "But we must rest first. This takes much from me." He looked at her closely then and saw what he'd missed before. She was thinner, more translucent at the edges, as though the healing was consuming her substance. "Lyra, what's happening to you?" She smiled, sad and knowing. "The cost, Cale Thorne. There is always a cost." The night of Constellation Hearts. On the fourth night, with his back and shoulder transformed into rivers of soft light, Cale finally asked the question he'd been avoiding. "What happens to you when this is finished?" They were in his workshop, surrounded by lantern light and wood shavings. Lyra sat on the half-finished rocking chair, looking more fragile than ever, her edges blurring slightly, as though she were a watercolor painting left in the rain. "I will return to the spaces between," she said quietly. "When I absorb and transform your pain, it becomes part of me. And when there is too much, I dissolve back into the realm I came from. I will never take physical form again." Cale's heart lurched. "Then we stop. Now. I can live with one scar." "Can you?" Lyra stood, crossing to him. She placed one hand on his chest, directly over his heart, and he felt the heat of her palm through his thin t-shirt. The deepest wound is here, Cale. The guilt. The shame. The belief that you should have died instead of her. That scar is killing you slowly, poisoning everything you touch. He wanted to deny it, but couldn't. She was right. He'd felt it for 5 years, the rot spreading outward from his chest, making everything feel distant and grey. If I heal you completely, Lyra continued, and her grey eyes were luminous in the lamplight, you will be able to live again. Truly live. Finish the furniture. Build new things. Maybe even love someone without feeling like you're betraying Marin's memory. But you'll be gone, Cale said roughly. And I've just found you. That's not fair. No, Lyra agreed, and for the first time, she smiled fully. It transformed her face into something radiant. It is not fair. But healing never is. It costs something precious. They stood in silence, hands on each other, her palm on his heart, his hand covering hers. Outside, the silver rain had started again, gentle this time, blessing rather than burden. What if I said no? Cale asked. What if I chose you over healing? Lyra's smile turned bittersweet. Then I would stay until my form degraded completely, and you would remain half dead, and neither of us would have fulfilled our purpose. She stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her skin, smell that strange petrichor scent that clung to her. Or you could choose life. And I could choose to make my final act mean something. Cale's throat tightened. He slid his hand from hers to her face, cupping her cheek. Her skin was impossibly soft, and where he touched, tiny sparks of light danced between their contact points. I don't want to lose you, he whispered. Then remember me, Lyra whispered back. Let me become part of how you heal others. Let me matter. She rose on her toes and kissed him, gentle at first, then deeper as he pulled her close. She tasted like rain and starlight and goodbye. Her body was solid against his, real and warm, and when his hand slid down her back, she made a soft sound against his mouth that was entirely, perfectly human. They broke apart, breathing hard. Lyra's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Now, she said, before I lose my courage, take off your shirt and let me finish what I came here to do. Cale pulled his shirt over his head, tossing it aside. His chest was unmarked by visible scars, but he could feel the twisted knot of guilt lodged behind his sternum, heavy as a stone. Lyra placed both palms over his heart and met his eyes. Speak it aloud. Every regret. Every shame. Every should have and could have. Give them to me. And Cale, the carpenter who had spent 5 years building walls around his grief, finally let them fall. The legacy of luminous scars. The words came like a flood. I should have checked the bridge supports before Marin crossed. I should have called out sooner. I should have been stronger, faster, better. I should have saved her. I should have died instead. I should remember her face more clearly. I shouldn't forget the sound of her laugh. I shouldn't still be alive when she's been gone for 5 years. I shouldn't feel anything but grief. I shouldn't. Enough, Lyra whispered, and her hands pressed harder against his chest. Light exploded between them, not gentle silver but blinding white gold that filled the workshop like a newborn star. Cale screamed as the knot behind his sternum began to unravel, the guilt and shame and twisted love all coming apart in waves of agony and release. Lyra screamed too, her body beginning to fracture with light, cracks spreading from her hands up her arms, across her shoulders, down her torso. She was breaking apart, dissolving, and the light from the cracks was the same white gold pouring into Cale's chest. Don't let go, Cale gasped, even as tears streamed down his face. Please, Lyra, don't. I'm not letting go, she said, and her voice was layered with 1,000 harmonics now, becoming less human by the second. I'm becoming part of you. Can't you feel it? And he could. Where the knot had been, something new was forming, a constellation of light that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. Marin's love. Lyra's sacrifice. His own capacity for survival and creation and continued existence. All woven together into something that didn't hurt anymore. The light reached a crescendo, then softened. Cale looked down at his chest and saw what Lyra had made. His entire torso was now mapped with flowing patterns of luminescence, like a star chart drawn beneath his skin. His heart beat at the center, a steady pulse of warm light that would never fade. Lyra was barely solid now, her form flickering like a candle in wind. But she smiled, fierce and triumphant. "Now you can heal others," she whispered. "Anyone you touch with true intention will feel their own pain begin to transform. It's my gift. My last gift." "Lyra," Cale reached for her, but his hands passed through her shoulders, grasping only light. "Kiss me goodbye," she said. "Please." He did, pressing his mouth to hers one last time. She tasted like rain and starlight and forever. The kiss lasted an eternity and an instant, and when he pulled back, she was only light, a woman-shaped aurora dissolving into particles that drifted upward through the workshop roof and into the night sky. Cale stood alone in the lantern light, chest glowing softly, tears on his face, feeling more alive than he had in 5 years. 10 years later, Ashvale had changed. The forgotten mountain village had become a pilgrimage site for the suffering. They came from everywhere, people carrying grief and trauma and pain, seeking the carpenter whose luminous hands could hold their hurt without breaking. Cale, now 38, still worked in his workshop. But the space was filled with finished furniture now, each piece completed with care and intention. The rocking chair Lyra had sat in was the first thing he'd finished after she left, and it now stood in the place of honor by the window. He'd learned to use the gift she'd given him. When someone came seeking help, he would invite them in, listen to their story, and then, if they permitted, place his glowing hands on their shoulders, their backs, their hearts. The light would flow from him into them, warm and gentle, teaching their bodies a different way to hold suffering. He didn't erase their pain. That wasn't the gift. Instead, he transformed it into something bearable, something that could illuminate rather than destroy. The scars remained, but they no longer controlled the narrative. At night, when the work was done, Cale would climb the path to the old stone bridge, rebuilt now, safe and solid, and look up at the stars. And sometimes, on the clearest nights, he swore he could see her among the constellations, a woman made of light, reaching downward as if to say, "I'm still here. You're still loved. Keep healing." The silver rain never fell again. It didn't need to. Cale Thorne had learned what Lyra came to teach, that grief is just love with nowhere to go, and the only way to honor the dead is to live so fully that their memory becomes light instead of shadow. Lessons learned. True healing doesn't erase our scars but transforms how we carry them, turning wounds into wisdom and pain into purpose. Love's greatest gift is not in staying forever, but in changing us so profoundly that even absence becomes a form of presence.